Hello and welcome back, everyone, and welcome for the first time to those of you who are just now joining us for the SpectraLIVE event. Earlier today, we covered hardware. We're now going to shift into a software conversation, and this is specifically about Spectra's StorCycle. If you are just joining us, use your question box to write in any questions you may have, and at the end of the session, we will get to those questions, time allowing. With us for this session, we have Mr. Jeff Bronstein, who is our Director of Product Management. We also have Eric Paulette joining us again. Eric is the Product Marketing Manager. And so between these two, we're going to hear updates about Spectra's StorCycle. So Jeff, are you on with us?
Yeah, hey Bob, thanks. Can you hear me and see my screen okay?
Yes, loud and clear. It's over to you.
Great, thanks a lot. So I'm excited to talk about StorCycle. This is a product we released late last year for helping customers manage their data. We're constantly releasing new updates to the product, so I'm excited to talk about some of the new things coming down the line for the product. With me, as Bob mentioned, is Eric Paulette, our Product Marketing Manager, and he's going to be talking about some of the new tools and resources available on our website to help you figure out what the best StorCycle solution is for you. So just a quick recap on StorCycle. What did we do? Why did we build it? Well, we've got a lot of large organizations we work with. For many of them, their data is their business, or they have lots of data. It's growing rapidly. Oftentimes, they're keeping it all on an active primary tier of storage. But it turns out that often a lot of that data is inactive. You know, typically industry numbers you hear is maybe often something like 80% of the data is inactive and doesn't need to be on that primary tier of storage. There are secondary solutions available that are lower cost and highly reliable, and of course that's what Spectra is in the business of. But sometimes it's difficult for organizations to figure out what's inactive, to move it, and to make it easy for users to access, to not disrupt them or cause any extra cycles for them or for the IT or storage managers. So what we did is we introduced a model that we actually weren't the first to come up with it, but there's a two-tier model that a lot of industries talk about, and we coined this term perpetual tier for the less active tier of data. So we've got, you can see in the sphere, the active tier of data is the primary tier. That's where you're doing your active work with your data. And then you can move that off to a perpetual tier that's lower cost and may allow some collaboration and sharing. That could include the cloud, object storage, disk, tape. So we introduced StorCycle really to act as the glue between these two tiers, to move data between the two tiers and make it seamless and make it easy for users to access the data no matter where it is, and for the users to be sure that the data is securely stored. Of course, by moving the data, we can also potentially make that primary tier faster by getting data off of it. We can really, though, especially in these day and age right now, having to buy more primary tier as you have more data generated just may not be an option for some organizations at this point. So being able to put it on a more affordable tier of storage is just going to be essential. And so managing those two tiers in a seamless way is critical. So cost savings is really the primary driver for this, making it easy to continue to use the data no matter where it is, and make it easy to work with and collaborate in the cloud, of course, are other important aspects of that. StorCycle has four main functions, or pillars as we call it sometimes: identify, migrate, protect, and access. So first, StorCycle will identify the inactive data either through automated methods, sort of a set and forget, or project-based, where users can decide what projects or directories or data sets can be moved themselves. Then, of course, it's going to migrate that data that it identifies. So it's going to move that to one or more of the tiers of storage in that perpetual tier, and we'll see a diagram of that in a minute. That's where the real cost savings comes in, right? Storing that data, freeing up space on your primary storage, not having to buy new, active, more expensive storage systems. And then, of course, protecting it is critical, right? You're taking this data by migrating it or archiving it. You're taking it out of the traditional backup cycle that occurs on active storage systems to protect active data. Remember, this is This is a different paradigm. This is archive or migrate. So we want to make sure that data is safe. We may want to make multiple copies of it, potentially in different geographic locations for disaster protection, maybe even using like an offsite or ejected copy from tape, right? We really may need to protect from ransomware. It all depends on how, what the value of the data is. Of course, seamless migration to newer technologies as they become available is key, like newer disk systems or cloud storage. Maybe you want to change cloud vendors. Maybe you want to upgrade to a new tape technology. That can all be done seamlessly behind the scenes. And then, of course, access is critical, right? It's all for naught if the users are disrupted, if they can't access the data that's been migrated to this perpetual tier. And we'll talk more about that, and proud to introduce one of the new features that's going to make that even easier.
And Jeff, real quick, if you go back, so under the identify section, I mean, I hear a lot of times that when you start to ask people, how much data do you have? What does it consist of? A lot of times you get a kind of deer in the headlights look, like, well, I don't know. Is this something that would really help them understand what their data is, and how old are their files, who's creating the most amount of data, what life cycle are you in? Are you actively creating data, or is it kind of flattened out? Or is this something that can help with to understand data?
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point, Eric. Thanks for bringing that up. So yeah, absolutely. That's something that StorCycle is really critically focused on, is let's look at the data, let's analyze it, let's look at the age of it, let's look at the size of it, let's really determine what we want to do with that data based on that age and size. And what you'll be seeing in our new features here in a minute is we've introduced a cost savings calculator, sort of a dark data, an analyzer, if you will, that can go out and look at that data. So we can go and install this tool before you even purchase StorCycle. Let's go look, us or one of our value added resellers, we can work with you and help you identify that inactive data. Let's look at your data and figure out and make a plan before you even, commit to a solution. So yeah, that's great. I'll show that. Thanks, Eric. Here's a visual of StorCycle. So we've got those two tiers like we saw in the sphere earlier. So the primary or active tiers on the left, the perpetual tiers on the right. StorCycle is provided as just simply a software installer. So you as the organization provide a server. Typically it's a VM server instance. It could be Linux, could be Windows. We provide that to you. You install that, and then anything that server can connect to as a file path, we can scan and migrate data off of from that primary storage tier. So it could be flash, it could be block-based attached storage, anything like that. As long as ultimately the server can see it as a file path, we can take action on it, and we can connect to as many of those paths as you want. And then we're going to migrate or copy. We also have a copy option, by the way, but primarily we're focused on migrating data to one or more targets on the perpetual tier. And that can include cloud. Right now we support Amazon or anything that looks like Amazon. And again, I'm happy to announce, and you'll see in our next release, we're adding Glacier support to that, because really you're trying to maximize cost savings, and with that Glacier tier you can really get the lower cost cloud savings using that tier. That also allows you with that cloud connector to connect to local object storage if you want. So if you've got any type of local S3 type storage, you can use that. We can connect to NAS as well. So we can connect to really any NAS you've got, or again, it's any file path, but also, of course, Black Pearl NAS from SpectraLIVE is a great solution for that. It's a very affordable, highly reliable secondary NAS storage. And then finally, we can connect StorCycle to our Black Pearl Converged Storage System, which acts as an object storage gateway to disk or tape or other sites as well. We can replicate to other sites. So with this combination, so you can migrate things to any one of these targets, and often you may choose more than one. And in fact, that's what some of our customers are doing. In fact, one of our big government organizations here in the U.S. is moving data both to Black Pearl and to the cloud. So there's a lot of things you can do there to, again, provide that ultimate protection, but you really have a lot of flexibility.
And Jeff, does your Black Pearl have to be locally connected to your StorCycle server, or could that be even a remote site of the Black Pearl?
Yeah, good question. So it really can be anywhere. All the communication is with Black Pearl is very similar to how you can communicate with the cloud. It's all HTTP REST API based communication. So as long as you have an Ethernet or IP connection to that Black Pearl, you can connect to it with it anywhere. Absolutely.
And then as far as the primary storage tiers, what is it that you need to be able to see it? I mean, we're not scanning Spectra storage, so these are obviously third-party storages, and is it disk, flash, combination? Can it be anything?
Yeah, it really can be anything that StorCycle software system can connect to. And some solutions require special software to connect. So in Linux, for example, we run on CentOS. And so we can add, for example, the Lustre client or the StorNext client, and we can connect directly to either of those storage solutions and scan file data off of those solutions, which we are doing for customers now. So yeah, it's just about anything that server can see as a file path. So it's very open.
That's great.
We tried to make it as generic as possible. So in terms of migrating data, we think about it in two main methods, right? So how do we migrate the data and think about it in terms of like groups? So we really have two methods of data migration, and both are supported on all versions of StorCycle, of course. The first is where we think more about project-based archiving. This is where I have a set of data, a set of files. Maybe it's a genomic sequence run, maybe it's a weather instrument, a autonomous vehicle test run, a set of files that I worked on, a movie season, a TV season, something like that. Essentially, it's a directory full of files, correct? So that's when we talk about project-based archiving. But it's I as the user, maybe I'm sort of more of like a storage manager within my group. I want to archive this project, right? I want to get it off the active storage. I want to protect it. I want to free up space for other projects. It's a one-time event. I'm going to add some important like metadata or tags to it so that I can find it later. And I want to move other projects easily in the same way. And in fact, with our new clone feature we have that I'll show you, it's never been easier than ever to just essentially duplicate a project, a migration job with this project-based archiving where I just select a new directory and leave all the other settings the same. So very simple. It's a one-time thing. And it really puts a lot of power into the user's hands, especially if they have awareness of the projects. Now, the other solution is probably more traditional, what you might think of for a traditional data management solution, which is, I'm an organization, maybe I'm the IT manager, I've got this large heterogeneous data set. I don't really have awareness or exposure to the projects, and nor do I really want to. I don't have users that are going to be helping me archive projects. I need the system to do that for us. And so what we'll set up StorCycle to do is we'll point it to a share directory. We'll set some policies that maybe we want to say, everything that's more than a year old and greater than a megabyte in size, because we don't want to move the small stuff because it goes slower and doesn't free up a lot of space. And so what we'll do is we'll set up that policy, we'll scan that share, and we'll find all that data that meets that policy that maybe hasn't been touched in a year. And we'll take it off and put it onto the perpetual tier. We'll migrate it to whatever targets you want. And maybe we'll do that, on a weekly or a monthly basis, right? This is old data. It's not like a backup where I needed to run every night necessarily. I can run this, once a week or once a month and look for those old files. But I just set it up once and I really don't have to worry about it. Set and forget. It will take off all those old files. It's kind of like pruning, right? We'll continuously be looking for old files and freeing up space. So the great thing is you can use both of these methods, both the project-based archiving and the auto-migrating of inactive data. You can use both of those in your StorCycle solution, and most of our customers are using both. The beautiful thing is that no matter which method you choose, you can restore the data in exactly the same method. You don't have to know which of these two methods was used to access or restore the data. And speaking of restore, we have a number of ways that we replace the files so that you can easily access them or restore them. The first thing we can do with files that are migrated is we can replace them with HTML links. This is something that we think is fairly new and really works well with storage targets that have a longer restore time. So if you think about Amazon Glacier, it takes 4 hours to get your files back. You think about tape, it takes a couple minutes to get to the first bytes of the file on the tape. So you can't really quote unquote, trick the user into thinking that the file is still there like many other systems do. We think that this is an easy way for users to get their files back, but still clearly communicates to them what's going on. I'll show you that on the next slides. Now the next one I'll be showing you in a demonstration, which is what we call our transparent access or symbolic link feature. This is where we replace the file with a symbolic link, and the symbolic link is, many of you may be familiar with that term, symbolic link. Basically, it's just a pointer in the file system that points to another file. So we replace the original file with a pointer that points to the file in the new location where we've moved it to onto a NAS target. So we can dramatically reduce costs by moving to something like Spectra's Black Pearl NAS, which has a cost of about 5 cents a gigabyte that's the ownership cost. So you can dramatically reduce your costs while not disrupting users, while making the data still transparently accessible. They don't even have to know that the files were moved. They can continue to go to the old location and access them. The third option, besides those link options, is that we can just copy the file. So maybe you've got some, StorCycle is not a backup solution, but it can make protective copies of files if needed. So maybe you're filming a reality TV show, you've done some footage for the day, you come back and you want to make a protective copy of that data. Or maybe you've got a project and you just want to, make a protective copy. We can absolutely do that. And then the last option would be to just remove the files off the source completely. And we have a great search tool, great web interface in the StorCycle web access tool, where you can go ahead and search for those files by project, by tag, by metadata, by file or folder name, and get what you're looking for.
So Jeff, is it fair to say that remove files is more like a traditional archive that people may have known in the past, where it's no longer any remnants of it on that primary storage, and the only way to view it or access it or search it is to actually go to that secondary storage tier, or for this case, actually the StorCycle management GUI to help find and restore the data?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Eric. And you do bring up a good point, which is when we archive data or migrate data to the targets on the perpetual storage tier, all the files are accessible without StorCycle. So we use all native formats, right? So on NAS, we keep the same directory structure, the same file names. Same thing when we move stuff to Black Pearl or the cloud. So you're definitely not locked in. You also have other workflow alternatives to access the files. Great point. Let's talk briefly a bit more here about the HTML link. So again, we think this is a great solution for dealing with files that are moved to targets with a longer restore time. Again, there's all these great options for low-cost storage with things like Glacier, things like tape. But what we don't see as often is good user solutions that allow users to really leverage those most cost-effective storage options. And so with HTML links, we think we've done that. So if you see some files there on the left, that's the before, some files I want to migrate or archive. And then I migrate them, I take them away, I put them on the perpetual storage tier. They're now safe. I'm going to replace those files with these HTML files, and you can see they have almost exactly the same name, except they have a .html extension. So it's actually just a very small HTML file is what it is. I think it works out to about 6K or something like that. So we call them breadcrumbs. They sort of act as a hint that the file was there, with that name was there. But more importantly, when you open that HTML file, you get information that says basically, hey, there used to be a file here with this name. It's been moved. Here's when it was moved. Here's what the size of it. Here's where it was moved to if you'd like to go get it. And now you can also press these buttons to restore the files. So if you have permissions, when you press those buttons, the web interface of StorCycle will launch, allowing you to restore that file. You can restore just the file back to its original location, or you can choose other options, like maybe you want to restore other files around it or the whole project. Maybe you want to restore it to a new location. Those are all options you have. But what it does is it starts the restore process. The users can see the job and the status of it in the StorCycle web interface, and they'll get a alert via email when the job is complete, if they so choose, if they register for it. So a much more straightforward option. This works for any type of storage target, but works particularly well with the ones that have a longer restore time, like tape or Glacier. So you might, for example, have a data set where you want to work with it tomorrow morning. It's sitting on Glacier. You're going to start the restore process tonight before you leave work, and then tomorrow when you come back, all the files will be there for you to use. So let's talk about some of the new features. So we have a June release coming out. It's 3.1. We are constantly working on new features in StorCycle. We have a large engineering team at Spectra dedicated just to this product. We release new versions of the product every quarter, so roughly June, September, December, March. And so we've got one coming up next month, and I wanted to show you, we've got a lot in here. These are only about half the features that we have in this release, but I think they're the most interesting, so I wanted to show them to you. The first one I mentioned earlier, which is the transparent access or symlinks. We also now support Glacier, as I mentioned. We've got a great cost savings calculator that will show you how much money you would save if you migrate data, so you don't have to migrate it or even, commit to buying StorCycle before you figure that out. And then being able to clone an existing project or job so that you can, quickly do something to what you've done previously, very, a similar project. I'm going to do the first, second, and the first, third, and fourth all in one demo. So we're going to do a scan. We're going to do the cost savings calculator of the scan of that data. Then we're going to migrate the data using the clone feature. We're going to create a migrate project, and we're going to migrate it and replace it with symlinks. So we'll get to see all that in one demo. And then in a separate thing, I'll show you where the Amazon Glacier feature is. Amazon Glacier is a little harder to demo because Amazon doesn't even let you see that the files are listed in their system for 4 hours. So I won't make you wait 4 hours to see the files migrated, but I'll show you where that feature is. So I'm going to bring up a browser now. So this is the web interface of StorCycle. I actually have it running locally on my computer here. So this is a dashboard that shows you some basic information. I'm constantly reinstalling StorCycle as the product manager, so I'm always having to reset it. So the numbers aren't very exciting, but you get on the dashboard great information about cost savings by storage location and department, how much data you've moved, how much data is on the target, active jobs, and things like that. What we're going to do is we're going to migrate a set of data. We're going to do that project-based archiving. We're going to archive this project called Research Project 40. We're going to archive everything in it. You can see when I double click on it, it's got a number of directories in it. And if I open one of those directories, it's just got a bunch of text files. So we're going to archive all these files. First, though, we're going to do a scan and look at the cost savings calculator. Now, it's not going to be very exciting. I don't have this directory is not very large. I think it's only like, I don't know, I have 33 megabytes. But I don't want you to stick around. Now, StorCycle's scanner is very fast. It can scan files at a rate between 2 to 10,000 files per second, depending on the environment that it's running in, the nature of the network and the speed of the source and storage and so forth. And we just recently did a test where we scanned 100 million files in 4 hours. So it has a very good scanner, but I don't want you to stick around and watch files be scanned. So we'll just do a small project here. So first we'll go into the StorCycle web interface and we're going to do a scan. Now a scan is not required to migrate or archive data, but it can be done ahead of time. And obviously, like Eric was discussing, we can use that data to really figure out what we've got going on in our storage. So I'll say I want to do a new scan. Now this is my list of storage locations I've set up in StorCycle. I have one here called Primary Share, and that points to this location. Now, I'm cheating a little bit here. You can see I'm just doing this off of my C drive in Windows, but again, we just want to be fast and efficient here. So my storage location is going to be that Primary Share, and then from there, I'm going to choose this directory called Research Project 40. Then I'll choose Next, and it asks me when do I want to do the scan. Of course, I want to do it right now. I will hit Submit, and we'll see that job is complete. Now I can go and look at the data. So it tells me a lot about it, the job, and how big it is, how many files, and all that good stuff, which is all the stuff I would expect. And then I get a nice graph that shows the age and size of that data. So I can see on the x-axis is the age. Now in StorCycle, you can use whatever you want for age, last access, last modified, or created date. That's all in the global settings. The default is last access, but I find for demos and copying and pasting folders, it's easier to use last modified. So that's what you're looking at here. And then on the y-axis is the size of the files. and we've got a color coding to indicate, the groupings of the size of the files. So what we can do now is say, well, let's talk about hypothetically, what if we were going to move some of this data? How much money would we save if we moved it from where it is now, our more expensive primary active storage system to lower cost storage? So we'll pop up, this is one of the new features in the 3.1 release, this savings calculator button right here. So I'll pop this up and I can say, what if I migrated all data that was more than a year old and bigger than a megabyte? I don't want to move the small stuff because it's slow to move and not very efficient for saving space, okay? So that tells me I'm going to migrate, again, not very much, but let's pretend this is terabytes instead of megabytes, right? So 18 megabytes out of 33.4. I'm moving it from my source. Now I've put a very high number because we're not moving a lot of actual data, but this might be something like, $1,000 a terabyte or something like that, depending on what your primary storage costs. And then I'm going to move that to a target. Let's say I've got this deep storage, again, maybe that's really, let's call it $50 a terabyte or something like that. So I can see by moving that data, I'm going to save this much money. Now, obviously, with scanning of a real system, which we can do very fast and efficiently, we can give you some real numbers. And so we can work with you to figure out what are the appropriate numbers, both for the cost on the source as well as the target. And maybe you choose more than one target, right, to really be more realistic if you're going to move your data to 2 locations. It'll add up the total cost. Each of these storage locations has a default cost that I've configured in StorCycle, but as part of this calculator, I can change these values. So a great tool, we can show up, we can help you figure out, we can provide this graph, a nice age and size histogram, and then help you calculate how much you might save by migrating that data. Let's move on to actually migrating it. So we're going to do a migrate store job. Now, in prior releases of StorCycle, I would have to click on this button that says New Migrate Store Project, and I'd have to fill in all the fields in the wizard in order to get that done. But with the 3.1 release, I have this new feature called Clone Project. So I did an archive of another directory previously called Grant 39, and it was almost exactly the same, except the folder was different. So I want to change everything, I want to leave everything the same as this project except the folder. So I'm going to make a clone of this project by clicking over here, and it's going to basically pre-populate my wizard. So instead of Grant 39 clone, I'm going to call this Grant 40. And I still am going on the primary share, but now I'm going to go to Research Project 40 as my directory. Now it asks me, what am I going to take in terms of, first it asks me, am I going to do a new scan or use my old scan? The default is to do a new scan, but I can use the last scan to be more efficient because we did just run a scan that it could use, right? I can filter things based on age and size. That would be more appropriate if I'm doing a recurring job to do the pruning of old files automatically, more of the automated based archiving we discussed, but we're going to do the project-based archiving, so we'll take files of all ages and all sizes because we want every file in that directory. It shows us what we're going to archive in the graph again. We can include certain file types and exclude certain directories here if we want, but we won't do that. We want to target this target storage location called deep storage, and truth in advertising here, that is just another directory on my C drive, but that could just as easily be, a NAS system on another server. It could be Black Pearl NAS or whatever you want to move it to. And then replacement option, we're going to replace the files with symbolic links. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to click on next. And then the last thing it asks me, when do we want to schedule? We'll start now and we'll click submit. So it'll go ahead and start working on that project. And there it is. There's Grant 40. It's running now. And now it's complete. So the job should be complete. So if we go into Grant 40 now, Research Project 40. And by the way, this project name, that's one of the things you can search for. So before I show you the archive files, I gave the project a name. That's how I can search for the files later if I want to retrieve them via this web interface. I can also search by file name. And you saw I could add tags, metadata tags, when I was going through that wizard, and I could search for the files by those tags as well. But I don't want to search at all. I just want my users to not even know the files have been moved. So if we go into Research Project 40 now, we'll see that the files have been replaced with symlinks. You can see they now say 0 kilobyte because the symlink essentially doesn't really take any space up. And if I click on that file, so my default text editor is Notepad, you'll see that the file still is open. So the file actually is no longer in that location, but I am a user is completely unaware of that. I can continue to access it in that old location. And if you're curious, I can show you where it was moved to. I have another directory here called archive, and it was moved to research project 40. So this is where the actual file lives now, and that's where the symlink is pointing to, but that symlink can just as easily point to a file on a different server or different storage device. So several new features there that we covered: the calculator, the cloning the project, and symlinks, all very powerful tools, should make life even easier and better for our new and existing StorCycle users. The other interesting thing is our Glacier tier. So if we go to manage our storage locations, and by the way, this gear is something only StorCycle administrators can see. You click on this gear and you can manage storage. These are all my existing storage locations. If I go here to add a new one, I can say I want, maybe I've got a Glacier tier called, Glacier 12 or something like that. And that's going to point to what's called a vault or a bucket in Glacier. That's just a container that sits on Amazon. I can give it a description. I can associate it to a department so that the cost savings are tracked relative to that department. I can give it a cost in dollars per terabyte. I might calculate, what it cost me to store it for 5 years in Glacier and use that as the number or something like that. I can click next here. Now this is where the new feature is. Now we previously supported all these first 4 options here, but now I can also choose Amazon S3 Glacier. And this is where I enter all my Glacier information. I enter the region where the Glacier is and my credentials on AWS, on Amazon, and the vault that I'm using. If there's no vault name given, or if you give a name where the vault doesn't exist, we'll create that automatically. But that's it. Then you just choose that storage target. Just like we did in the wizard, this target would now be available as a location. Now what we're doing here is we're moving data directly to Glacier and restoring it directly from Glacier. Within Amazon, you can also tier, though, from what they call their standard or normal tier into Glacier. And so in our December release, we'll also add support for retrieving from Glacier if you originally moved the data into that standard tier, and then with Amazon policies tiered it to Glacier, we'll also be able to pull it back through that way appropriately. So more features to come there. Very excited about that. But in terms of other features coming on, we have an extensive roadmap with StorCycle, like I said. And so the next release next month represents that first box that says ease of use. So those are the features we talked about. The next one is a data security. So we're going to be adding security by storage location. So you can specify certain groups, like Active Directory groups, only have access to certain storage locations. That will allow you to lock down and control access to your files in StorCycle with different users and groups of users. We'll also be adding a feature we call scheduled delete or temporary storage policy. So let's say you want to move a file into, have StorCycle move a file into this perpetual tier, but maybe only keep it for 6 months or 3 years or something like that. Maybe you only need it temporarily stored. So we can set that up and expire those files. The other thing we'll be adding is CIFS or SMB on our Linux version of StorCycle. So right now we support NFS on Linux and CIFS SMB on Windows. And so if you need both of those, you need 2 instances of StorCycle right now. But we'll be adding CIFS SMB support on Linux. So if you need CIFS SMB and NFS support, you can do that all on the Linux version of StorCycle. Some of the other interesting features in the third box there, you can see it says exposed API. This would allow other applications that you may have or scripting tools to call the API of StorCycle instead of using its web interface to take actions. So you could programmatically or script things like scanning, migration, restores. This allows you to put StorCycle into your exact and specific workflow. We also have versioning, so we would allow you to store multiple versions of a file that has the same name and is in the same directory. This could be used if you've got a file that's changing and you want to make copies of it, or it could be that you archive a file off and then you put a file with that same name in that same directory. We can then archive that second file that you gave us, even if it has the same name. Other features that we're looking to add early next year would include clustering. First, we'll be adding high availability for hyperconverged VMs, so you can install StorCycle on hyperconverged VMs and have automatic failover. And then we'll be adding clustering for performance. So you can have multiple instances of StorCycle working in parallel, scanning and migrating data to get higher performance and higher reliability. The other thing that we're focused on is that we would support cloud or S3 or object storage as a source of data. Right now, as you saw, everything in our primary or active tier is file-based, but we'll be adding this object-based interface too. So for example, maybe you've got a local object storage system and you want to archive data out of it into something else. Or maybe you've got data in the cloud. Maybe you're generating data in the cloud and you want to bring it down either to another different cloud storage device or to a local copy. That's something we get asked about a lot. And I know some of the talks earlier were talking about that. It's great to be using the cloud and using tools in the cloud to generate data, but if you're going to be storing that data for an extended period of time, it may not always make sense to keep that data in the cloud. So being able to seamlessly migrate it to local storage for greater affordability may be a good option. So lots of great options coming up. We're really focused on continuously improving this product and having frequent releases. Let's move to a poll here. So the poll question, and Bob and Katie, if you can pop that up, that would be great.
You got it.
Okay.
Here
The
we
question
go.
has to do with data access and retrieval mechanisms. So we talked about a few different ways to get your data back. Of course, the new one we introduced is that transparent access or symbolic links. Works great when you're moving data to NAS. HTML links work really well for users being able to self-service archiving to targets that have a longer restore time, like Glacier and tape. And sometimes users also just want to be able to go into a web interface and search for what they need to retrieve by project name, by tag or metadata, by file or folder name. So which of these would be, a lot of you are probably going to want to use more than one, but which one to your organization do you think is the most valuable? So take your vote now and we'll take a look at the results.
Wonderful. I'm going to give us 5 more seconds for people to submit their responses. All right, get your votes in. I'm going to close the poll and display the results.
Okay, so what we're seeing here is the symbolic links are at the top with 47%, so almost half. HTML links at 27% and search via web interface at 26%. So that's an interesting distribution. What do you take from that, Jeff?
Yeah, it's really critical to organizations that they not disrupt users and user activity. And so the transparent access really gives them that capability. They really want to be able to save costs, right, especially now. But at the same time, they're pressured not to disrupt users' workflows, and the transparent access feature really allows that. So we're really excited to introduce that.
Great.
Great.
All right.
Cool.
Now let's see. We've got a demo of a calculator. Is that right, Eric? Are you through?
Yeah.
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 And
I should call it a configurator, I guess, rather than a calculator.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's a more accurate representation.
Okay.
So quickly, I'll go through. This is something that we are launching here in the very near future. It's not quite live yet, but you should see it within the next week or so. And really what this is geared towards is to help highlight a lot of the flexibility that StorCycle has as a solution for really any organization out there. We tried to build it in a way that helps guide you in making some intelligent data storage decisions based on what you have. So we have this idea of a protection level. This is something where there are 5 different levels of protection, but it's geared around how protected do you need your data, around number of copies, number of sites, things like that. So you can have one copy in one location. That's great for data that is easily reproducible. It doesn't matter if it gets deleted or corrupted or something, but as you get into the 2 through 5, this is more around a true archival solution where you have more than one copy, oftentimes in more than one location, which you can get that when you get up to number 3. Same thing with 4, and then 5 is kind of our biggest, most complete solution, 3 copies in 2 or more locations on 2 or more different types of storage mediums, things like that. So if data protection and data availability is one of your key aspects, then protecting it goes hand in hand. But we can scale down a little bit and look at some of our other offerings. Next, we get into the license types. There are 4 licenses that StorCycle has available to it. It's primarily based on number of users. So we give you a little cheat sheet here. A user is somebody who can simply restore data. So it's an easy way of looking at a user. Capacity in terabytes, pretty straightforward. This is the amount that you would like to offload. So this is if you have a 1 petabyte solution, maybe 70% of that is inactive, so 700 terabytes would be moved or something like that. So this is ideally how much you're offloading. This can be easily changed. So if you need something that's more specific to you, let us know as well. And then you get into what are the targets that are available. This really gets into that flexibility that we have. You can do cloud and tape. You can do cloud and disk. You can even go ahead and use existing NAS that you might have, a non-Spectra NAS solution. So there are a lot of different options that you have. Again, if we look at our number 5, where we really get all of the options available, we can look through this. But and then you get a nice little breakdown down below here. How much does everything cost? We can look at it as a cost per terabyte per month or a cost per gigabyte per month. And we can also, again, go back and change anything at any given time. We can look at cloud and tape. So we can look here and see what is included in all of your solutions. Under hardware, you've got a Black Pearl, a tape library, tape drives, media, cables, 5-year support, installation. This really is the all-in hardware support, everything that you need for your solution. When you look at the cost of disk hardware here, we don't have anything selected, so it's 0. But you can also look at your StorCycle software license. One thing we did is cloud. Cloud and non-Spectra NAS has a small capacity charge that goes along with it, but that's represented here, as well as the full 5 years of your solution. So it's a really cool tool that'll help you get a ballpark. This is list price. This is not our most aggressive pricing, so please reach out to a Spectra rep or to somebody at SpectraLogic for the most aggressive pricing and something that really is tailored towards your solution. If there are any questions about it, we do have all of our assumptions and fine print that is located inside of this tool. It's broken out. You can see all of that stuff in there. And again, I mean, just this is looking at a 5-year solution. So what do you get? How long does it last? Tape libraries often last longer than 5 years, but this is just something to put a stake in the ground to be able to compare apples to apples across the board. A few notes that we have right now. This is a U.S. only tool due to the number of taxes and import charges and things like that happen when shipping overseas. We do not have that built in yet. That will come in the near future. But right now, this is all geared around U.S. pricing and excluding a lot of the import taxes and things like that are involved. So again, that'll come later on, but right now that's one of its limitations as we start to roll this out. And again, just want to highlight that this really is your all-in solution. You can get some nice images around what is it that your solution might look like wireframe, but a nice little snapshot of what it is that you're looking at and what you're considering, and then we can continue to have conversations around all of the different options that StorCycle has, capacity, future features, whatever is needed to fit your organizational need.
Right, a good thought provoker as well then.
Yeah.
All right, we are going to jump quickly, guys, to Q&A because we've only got technically about 2 minutes left, but since we have a 15-minute break here, we'll try to get a couple out. What about connecting to Azure? So
Sure, yeah.
Moving data to Azure as a target.
Yeah, absolutely. So the roadmap I showed you earlier is really just a snapshot. It's only about probably a quarter of the features that will get done each quarter.
Mm-hmm.
So Azure has a different protocol than Amazon, so we can't just point it to Azure, and so we'll need to create a new interface for Azure, and we absolutely have that on our roadmap. It is the next cloud interface that we want to add. So I would expect to see that probably before the end of the calendar year, support for Azure.
And Jeff, if
Gotcha.
there was a big need, could they go and leverage Black Pearl since Black Pearl integrates with Azure? Is that
Absolutely,
something
yeah.
that could happen?
Yeah, great point, Eric. So Black Pearl already does move to Azure, and so absolutely, since StorCycle can move to Black Pearl, and Black Pearl has policies where you can choose a number of targets itself, one of those can be Azure. So absolutely, that would work seamlessly, yeah.
Interesting. Okay, I'm going to jump around in the questions because one relates directly to that. Can StorCycle write directly to my tape library, or do I need Black Pearl?
You need Black Pearl, absolutely. The reason we built Black Pearl is to make it easier to get data to tape. Traditionally, writing to in each individual tape drive in a tape library is complicated, and so Black Pearl really simplifies that communication. That's initially why we released Black Pearl. It's why we were able to quickly and efficiently build an integration to tape with StorCycle. Even internally, you know, Black Pearl was much more efficient for us to build. But Black Pearl gives you a ton of other benefits besides just the easy connection. It allows you to define policies of how the data is written. How many copies do you want? Do you want them isolated on tapes compared to other data? You can use a LTFS tape format, for example, so that your data is not, you know, stuck in a proprietary format. There's, you know, oodles of benefits, and I encourage you to go to the Black Pearl website or the product section on SpectraLogic.com and really understand the benefits of Black Pearl, because it really is a worthwhile product to have if you're looking at tape. And you can move data into that tape library with Black Pearl with other workflows besides StorCycle, other software tools, other components. And so it's just extremely powerful to use.
Okay, great. If I migrate files to Glacier, how do symlinks work? How does it handle the delay in access to the file? So I think you covered this, but more specifically, that symlink versus HTML link and those low response tiers.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the main reasons we introduced HTML links is to not try to quote unquote trick the user into thinking that the files are somewhere immediately accessible, because they're not. When they're on Glacier, when they're on tape, they are not immediately accessible. And any application that tried to directly access those files would time out and the user would have a poor experience. So that's why we introduced HTML links. When you use symbolic links, if you just look at the, you know, their symbolic links are native to Windows and Linux-based file systems, and all they are is they are a pointer to another file-based path. So for symlinks, the target has to be NAS, because that's what symbolic links expect. They expect a file-based path, and that's what NAS is and other, you know, file-based storage. But also because on NAS, the file is immediately accessible and will immediately open, and that's critical for that symbolic link transparent experience. So long story short, symbolic links only work if you're at least making one copy to NAS or file-based storage as a target.
Okay, and then still on the subject of migrating out to something like Glacier, can I migrate directly to Amazon Deep Glacier in version 3.1?
No, right now we're only supporting Glacier. We've seen the greater demand for Glacier. You know, it's 4 hours versus what I think Deep Glacier is 12 to 24 hours for restore. And for a lot of organizations, that's just too long to wait for the data. But we are absolutely planning on adding that. It will be based on customer demand. I suspect we'll probably add that next year sometime. And that will, when we do add, you know, I mentioned that in the December release, we'll be able to restore from Glacier. If you started the data in the standard tier and tiered it within Amazon, if you tiered it to Glacier, when we add support for that, then we will also be able to add support to Deep Glacier. So you'll be able to set policies in Amazon. So StorCycle could move the data to the standard tier. You could then tier it to Glacier or Deep Archive, and we would be able to pull it back. And we'll have that before the end of the year.
A lot of ways to skin the proverbial cat.
There is, absolutely.
A last question, I'm going to throw two out there, just comment on a little bit. We will answer all the questions directly. We won't be able to do it in the time remaining. But a couple of questions came in around that project archive, and that's pretty an important one. Let's see, a couple specifically were, does StorCycle support subfolders in a project folder? And then also, can I restore the directory of a target file, the directory that a target file is part of? I might not want to restore each individual file or the entire project.
Yeah, that is a great question. So First of all, I should say that when you set up a storage location, where you're going to pull data from, you can set that at any level you want, any directory level. You can do it at the top level share or any subdirectory. Then when you archive a project, typically you're going to select a directory that you want to archive, and then everything in that directory, including subdirectories and the files in those subdirectories, will be archived as part of that project. Right now, you either have to select the whole project to restore, or you have to select the individual files you want. In the 3.2 release in September, though, you will be able to select specific subdirectories as well within a project that you want to restore. So we will be able to do that starting in September. I think that's what the question is.
Okay, great. Excellent job, guys. Again, if you submitted a question, you will get a direct response to that.